for those of you that don't know, my name is Kiana, and same with my husband, as well as Mike Patterson. I'm 50-50. People have always asked, what are you? I'm 50-50. My mom is white. My dad is black. My dad is dark skinned. My mom is blonde hair, blue eyes, and I grew up also in Southern California in Orange County in a predominantly white community, ritzy. All my friends had a lot of money, and I didn't. And it was confusing. It was very confusing. Any job I've applied for or application I had to fill out, it's like, what box do I check? And it's so frustrating when you can only check one. It's like, I can't identify with one or the other. And, my parents split when I was 9. And so I was raised by a white mom in a white community. And my older sister and I, we did always feel out of place, and it wasn't until college and until I became a disciple that I was actually accepted by Black people, by Black women specifically. And because growing up, I was a source of contention. I always got horrible looks from dark-skinned Black women because I had light skin and light eyes. And it's like, I didn't choose that. Like, you act like I chose the way I look. I just am what I am. And so I was so grateful, like Charmaine shared, when I came into the kingdom, where I was finally able to just relax and feel accepted and just be who I was and not feel like I had to identify with one or the other, Black or white. I could just be. And, I think it breaks my heart knowing that we even have to have this phone call right now to address what's going on in the kingdom, but it's real and it must happen. And so there's a couple of scriptures that they just keep coming back in my mind. And there's a lot of scary scriptures in the Bible, but the one that I've always feared the most is in Matthew. And Matthew chapter 24, verse 12, it says, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. And more than any other scripture in the Bible, that one just scared me the most. And I feel like it's happening. And I just, as a woman in God's kingdom, I'm honored to even be able to speak on this matter, to even speak and be heard. And as far as a practical solution, I can't say this is what you should do or shouldn't do, or this is right or this is wrong. I think emotions are emotions, and you got to feel them for what they are, but then respond with what is right. And there's 2 scriptures that I'd like to share. And again, specifically, I'm just addressing women right now that are listening. But in 1 John chapter 1, verse 6, it says, those who say they live in God should live their lives as Jesus did. And I keep going back to that, what we learned kind of just as kids, WWJD, like, what would Jesus do? But I feel like right now, I've really been having to ask myself that question, what would Jesus do? And I find my answer in 1 Peter chapter 2, starting in verse 21. It says, for God called you to do good, even if it means suffering. Just as Christ suffered for you, he is your example. You must follow in his steps. He never sinned nor deceived anyone. He did not retaliate when he was insulted or threaten revenge when he suffered. He left his case in the hands of God, who always judges fairly. He personally carried our sins in his body on the cross so that we may be dead to sin and live for what is right. And so that's my answer. I've chosen to not be silent. I haven't. Blackout Tuesday yesterday, I didn't post anything, not because I chose to be silent, but because I chose to leave this case in the hands of God. And I believe that he's going to judge fairly and justly. And I don't want to offend one side or the other. I feel like I have to walk on eggshells with certain people with what I say in the kingdom, and that just breaks my heart. But I do understand that ultimately my my life is my message. So I don't feel the need to go out and protest with the sign. I feel like my daily life as a Christian woman, that's my message. That's me holding up my sign, my banner. And so my words, my prayers, my daily devotionals, that's what I can do as my part. So I'm full of love. So when people come to me with all the things that they feel, I can redirect them towards God. I feel like that's my job. That's my duty in this time. Thank you for letting me share.
Thanks for allowing me to share. I am 100% Black African American. I did the DNA ancestry, made it more complicated, but I found out that a large percentage of that is I'm African American, specifically West African. But again, it's a little bit more complicated. So I find myself just saying I'm Black American, which I've for me personally, growing up in Houston, Texas, a southern state, racism is a part of life. It's a everyday thing. It's something that when you're born, it becomes very real, very early. And you learn as you grow up how to navigate through it. And even so much so, I've had my own personal experiences with racial discrimination. There was a time where it was Christmas, my family, we were going out to the movies. And long story short, because my brothers, and I have 3 brothers and no sisters, because my brothers were Black, in this movie theater that was in a predominantly white area, they were racially profiled, and the officer was telling us to leave the theater while my mom was present, and we were all minors. And it escalated so fast to the point where there were 3 officers on my youngest brother, 3 officers on my second oldest brother, and the 3 officers that were on my younger brother had billy clubs to his neck, and he couldn't breathe. And I was screaming to this officer to get him off of my brother. And as I'm screaming and in panic and fear of my brother losing his life, 2 officers come and grab me and put me in a chokehold. All the while, my mom is there screaming and crying and begging them to let us go. In every possible way, whether, let's just say my brother were to have done something that would have caused or warrant him needing to be arrested. We were minors. They should have just spoken to my parents. They should have just spoken to my mom. And it didn't stop there. The system was so unjust that we all 3 were charged with felonies on a police officer and arrested. And my mom could not get us out. There was no bail, there was nothing. I literally sat in jail for an entire week. On top of that, we got probation for an entire year, and still to this day on my record is a felony against a police officer. By the grace of God, it is sealed and it is not open. So when I go to apply for a job or go to college, it doesn't pop up. And for a long time growing up, and that's just one incident. That's doesn't even count the other incidences that happened throughout my life. Growing up in school, went to Pershing Middle School, classes were still segregated. I was the only African American woman in our advanced class. And there were 2 hallways. You had a hallway where you had the advanced classes and the other hallway where they, were just the regular classes. Mm-hmm. But the African Americans and the Latinos were in the regular classes, and majority of the Caucasians were in the advanced classes. And I remember sitting in my history class like, I don't feel comfortable. So instead of staying, I just left and went to the regular classes. And so growing up, this was just my life. I didn't have any Caucasian friends. I didn't multiracial culture that was non-existent for me in my life growing up. I only had Black friends, majority, and Latinos. And that was kind of my life. But becoming a disciple really helped to purge the hatred that was in my heart. Because when I first came into the kingdom and I saw all the beautiful culture, I was like, what is going on here? And there was this indignation, like, this isn't right. This can't, like, no, like, you know, whites can't be with blacks. And my husband's white. I was just like, okay. He's not black. I was sort of just like, you know, but becoming a disciple and learning how to have the heart of Jesus, it taught me how to love. It genuinely taught me how to love, and it taught me how to get rid of the deep hatred that was in my heart. And I'm so grateful that even now, as we're experiencing, and it's really being shown, the truth of racial discrimination, the truth of injustice, and how far it goes, specifically in the Black community, that the fear is real. To not have a voice or a platform of protection at the very thing that's supposed to protect is a very real thing. You are truly left to the mercy in the hands of the people around you, but ultimately what has helped me, God, you know. And so I would say to those, you know, like myself, you know, you're a Black American Christian woman, my encouragement to you would be Colossians 3. I believe it's Colossians 3:12. And I've learned through getting rid of the hatred, I've learned to have compassion. And in Colossians 3:12, it says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. This is what I am called to clothe myself with. And especially in a time like this where you see rampant injustice, and my heart goes out to George Floyd's family and all those involved. Like, I can only imagine what it's like to lose someone at the hands of just because of the color of his skin, you know. It's so inhumane, and I feel for that family. But I also, my heart breaks for those cops who only knew hate to give hate. That there was just a deep lack of love in him that he could do something so inhumane. Like, something is really wrong that's what you could do without any type of like guilt or remorse. Like, stop, don't do that. Maybe I should, like, just nothing. Just pure evil. And I just, yeah, it's just, it makes no sense to me. And I just think for me, I've learned how to, in these times of injustice, just have compassion and not be fueled by my hatred, but to empathize and to understand that as a Christian, you know, I'm to clothe myself, even in times of injustice, with compassion. And two, within the church, you know, I definitely have heard things about racism within the church or as a leadership. And I don't think it's a leadership issue. I think it's more of us just as individual disciples learning how to have conversations through gentleness, through humility, and talking about these different things. Even if you see a disciple being insensitive to your nationality or race, to not go, oh, this is a leadership issue, but to just address it with that person, that individual, and understand it's an individual issue. So thank you for allowing me to share.
What am I? Well, I identify as multiracial or biracial now. Prior to being a Christian, I saw myself as a Black woman, and that's the box that I checked on surveys and different things. Because in my home, Blackness was at the forefront. My mother is of mixed race, but she grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, as what most would see as a Black woman. My father is also a Black man, and so I'm actually the lightest of my siblings. My brother, being the youngest, and with a different father, a more darker skinned father. He is the dark chocolate cappuccino. No, he's darker chocolate. My sister is like caramel, and I'm like vanilla. So yeah, I grew up with a lot of different voices and perspectives, and though I now in the current climate am on the I'm on the end of the spectrum of privilege. I can have white passing privilege, as some have coined it. I do definitely share in the deep anger and frustration as a woman that is married to a Black man that has a Black daughter with brown skin, and whose brother and other family members are Black, darker skin Black, and I feel it. Something that has definitely been helping me during this time is John chapter 1 verse 5, and it is it's where, let me read it really quickly. Sorry. John chapter 1 verse 5 says, it says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And I love the scripture. This was the first thing that came to mind when I heard of George Floyd's murder, as well as the recent situation in Central Park with Christian Cooper, which is very disturbing as well, on the same exact day. I thought of the scripture because this is the answer, and darkness is powerless in the face of God. And I think that's something that as disciples we need to remember, because our power is finite, right? Our power is limited even, but God gives us access to his heart and his power through his scriptures, and that's really what's going to do the real work. And so, at this time, I think my main position is really obviously empathizing with those that are feeling hurt and all of that, feeling deeply, but I think also empathizing with those that don't, and understanding that on both ends of the spectrum, processing and understanding anything takes time, whatever position you're in. And I think as Christians, we need to understand that whether someone's in leadership or whether someone's not, that they're a human being and they're a person that is wrestling and dealing with things like you would deal with any sin. And so I know I think about God's love, just how God says he's the word says he's a consuming fire. How love is as unyielding as death, it says in the scriptures. But I think really understanding that God's love and his fire refines, it doesn't destroy. And I think that's something that has been confused, unfortunately, in our world. And we need to just remember, what kind of fire are we burning right now? What kind of light are we shining? Is it destroying or is it refining? So thank you for this opportunity to share. Seven has some feelings as well, but I'm grateful for the kingdom and all that God has taught me through it, in embracing my multi-racial identity, as well as embracing others.
Hi, my name is Jill, and I grew up in a community in the Pacific Northwest that was almost entirely white. And I'm really grateful for my parents because they instilled a lot of great values in us growing up. My dad was a competitive athlete, and so he played basketball in college, and I think that is where he really bonded with people that did not look like him. Some of his closest friends through his college years were Black, and I think that made a huge impact on him as a man. He would share stories with us growing up about traveling on the road to different towns, and after their games, they would go out to restaurants to eat together to celebrate their victories. And and sometimes the restaurants would not allow some of the teammates in because they were Black. And my dad, as a team captain, would stand up and grab the whole group and talk to the coaches and say, we're not going to eat here tonight. And that was just a conviction that he had. He loved his teammates. And I remember the first time I heard the N-word used. It was on a Christmas day. I was a little girl, and we were at a great uncle's house. And I believe he was telling a joke, and he used that word. And my parents just gathered me and my 2 little brothers up, and we left the house, and we never went back there. And he had a great talk with us about what that word meant, and just had a profound influence on me. And so although I didn't know Black people growing up, it was always instilled in me that racism was real and that it was wrong. When I went away to college, I think that was the first time that I started to be more aware of people's feelings surrounding racism. I saw people joining clubs and sororities and fraternities that were largely unified around race and ethnicity. And I heard a lot of loud voices and a lot of different messages for the first time. And so I think intellectually I understood that racism was real, that it was systemic, that it was institutionalized at an intellectual level. And I knew that that was wrong. And I even changed my major to political science. And I interned in DC, and I was pursuing a career where I thought, my part in all of this is I will be writing legislation and trying to make an impact in that way. But in the very last semester of college is when I became a disciple. And again, it was one of the first things that I loved about the kingdom of God was that it was multinational, and it was every color of the rainbow. And, I looked at Jesus and his message, and it just made sense to me that this is love. It's unconditional, it's selfless, and it doesn't see color. And so in a lot of ways, even just being in the kingdom for the last almost 30 years, I've been kind of insulated to a lot of what people of color suffer with and struggle with every day in their lives. And I think I've just been a little bit unaware of the depth of it. I have zero understanding of what it must be like to just have to fight so hard every day, whether it's getting an education, your career, in every aspect of life, having to fight and struggle just to be seen and to be heard. And I think I have not been able to connect to that. Even, when Black Lives Matter became a movement, and I would see the signs and the messages, to me, it was another social justice issue, like abortion or like so many other social justice kinds of issues. And it wasn't really until the last couple weeks where, hearing the story of Ahmaud Arbery going for a jog and being literally hunted down in the middle of the street. And then seeing so blatantly a police officer's knee on the back of a man's neck. It was so shocking. And I think that now, as I see the protesters and I see the the signs, the Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden that message is so loud in my mind, like it never has been before. Just the message itself that Black Lives Matter, that, you know, the fact that that our Black brothers and sisters have to say that there has to be a message that we have to get out, is just so shameful to me. It's so heartbreaking. And I'm so sorry, and I'm so ashamed that I have not felt this in a deeper way, because so many of my best friends over the years are Black and brown men and women. You're my family, you're my friends. And I think I just have not been in touch with the level of just heaviness that you have to go about every day in your life, just interacting in society. I don't understand it. And it's horrendous. And your lives matter. And I'm sorry that we have to write signs and post that on social media just to validate that. It's just so wrong. And I think even, you know, seeing the extreme reaction of the looting and the anger and the violence in the streets, I think that the passage that comes to mind for me is Matthew 9:36. It's having the perspective of Jesus, that when he looks out at the crowds, he has compassion on them because they're harassed and helpless. They're sheep without a shepherd. And I honestly don't even have a problem. I mean, I know looting is wrong and stealing is wrong, but I think it just demonstrates a lot. Centuries of pent-up frustration and just not having their voices heard for so long. And it's kind of needed to rise to this level for some of us to really start to connect with their pain. And I think another scripture that is helping me right now that I'm sharing is in Ephesians 6:12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. I really see racism as demonic. It is satanic. And I also realize that as long as we're in the world and Satan is in this world, there is going to be racism. There is going to be hatred and division. And as disciples of Jesus, this is where we're able to fight back against that. I'm grateful to have that platform as a disciple, to go and reach people one by one and help them learn Jesus. To learn that one day there will be justice and there will be peace for every human being. I think that at this time it's just been difficult for me to speak at all. I've felt very paralyzed, mostly because I don't feel like I have a right to speak. I don't feel like I deserve to speak. I feel like it's more appropriate for me as a white woman to just listen and have compassion and to validate your feelings and to try to understand in a deeper way what you're going through. We have 3 beautiful Black women that live with us here in New Jersey in our home. And recently we got an anonymous letter in our mailbox from a neighbor. Very racist and very hurtful. And it made all 3 of our sisters cry. And one of them said, wow, I wish I could I wish I could change. I wish I could be someone that they could love, but you're asking me to change the color of my skin, and I can't do that. And it was horrendous to just be awakened to the fact that racism is alive and well on my block of my neighborhood, and that my dear sisters have to endure this. And they all said, it's okay. We deal with this all the time. We're used to it. And that was hard to hear. And so I'm trying to listen more than speak right now. I appreciate my brothers and sisters, and I love you, and I want to support in every way that I can. And thank you for letting me share.
I appreciate everyone who's really shared their hearts, their perspective, just with vulnerability and honesty and realness. I'm grateful for, everyone's just their point of view, because we all come from different backgrounds. We lived at different times. We lived at different places in the country, and we each have our own experiences that really do shape us in the way that we perceive and receive information. And I'm just grateful to be on this call, and grateful to be married to this man here who is just striving to do what's right before God. And so, my name is Brandon, and I was born in the 70s, the early 70s, and actually both of my parents are considered Black, and they both look like me. And so growing up, I always had to defend, no, I'm Black. No, I'm Black. Or what do you mix with? No, I'm Black. And as many of, brothers and sisters on this call have shared, I was not accepted by the whites who I went to school with, and I wasn't accepted by the Blacks who I went to school with, who I came in contact with, family, friends. I would always hear, well, you're not white. And then I'd always hear, well, you're not Black, you're not Black enough. And so growing up, that was my perspective, that I wasn't good enough. And so throughout elementary, junior high, high school, I was never good enough to fit in. And so I sort of was wandering, trying to figure out how and who and who's going to accept me for me. And I remember in college, I took a very bold stand, because I was like, I will fight for my place within my people, within my community. And so that's when I became very, very active politically and socially about the injustice. But what's crazy is in this fight, I felt almost like I had to prove myself to my brothers and sisters who were Black. And I took such a harsh racial stand against anyone who was not, to the point where when I saw interracial couples walking around, I used to get so irate at our Black men who were venturing outside of their Black women. And I had many conversations with these young men at the time, trying to understand why would they betray us like that. And I got a myriad of answers. But incredible, I was 28 years old when I came into the kingdom. And it was the first time, I believe Kiana shared it, that you felt like I can just be me. I don't have to fight for acceptance from this way or from that way. I can just be me. And it was beautiful. And it was so freeing, more than I'd ever experienced ever before. I'm also part of a sorority that's historically Black, which I love my sorors without a doubt. But it was the first time that there was such a release of pressure that helped me to open my eyes to, yes, there is absolutely injustice going on in this world, without a doubt. Like I think about just the history of our country. You know, we're talking 350 plus years ago in 1619, when slavery began. As far as the U.S. is concerned, slavery began. And it was in 1863 that the Emancipation Proclamation, which is supposed to have ended slavery, but we all know that that was not the case. So 250 years of it being legal. And then another 100 years, you fast forward from 1863 to the 1950s and 60s, when the Civil Rights Movement began, and another 100 years of showing that for 350 years there's been a lack of consideration of people who are brown and black skin, considered less than human. So now here we are today, 2020, and we're talking 80 years later, and it's still there. So what we're trying to fight is literally 400 plus years in the making. And yes, there's been incredible strides, but it is still present, and it's evident through what we see. There's a sense of fear and hatred in someone that does not look like us, because we don't feel comfortable. We don't know what they're going to do or what they believe or what they think. And I remember my dad one time told me, you know, it's almost easier living in the 50s and 60s because you knew who hated you, but now you don't know. And that just rung true. In the kingdom, I just have to say that I am so grateful to be a disciple, to be in God's kingdom, because truly, like, you look around this call and you just have everything. And I appreciate that. I never thought I would marry a white man. Never. However, like, when you pick up the cross of Jesus, you realize that, wow, love is just incredible, and it's freeing. I think about Exodus 17 in verse 15, where it's after Moses, Aaron, and Hur, and Joshua fought the Amalekites with Moses, Aaron, and Hur up on the mountainside, and you have Moses in the middle and Aaron and Hur on the sides holding up his arms. And as long as his arms are up, Joshua fought and was victorious. And right after that, the message of that says Moses built an altar and called it, "The Lord is my banner." For the hands are lifted to the throne of the Lord, but the Lord is my banner. That's the sign that I pick up, that the Lord is my banner, that Jesus paved the way and suffered and felt everything that we feel, the unjust behavior, the criticisms, the racial hatred, like all these things. Jesus felt the betrayal by people close to him. He felt all these things, and yet he still picked up the cross of love and suffering for me to be saved. You know, I think about Martin Luther King and what he shared in I Have a Dream speech, which is very profound. And he states, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And I believe that this is something that I dream for my own children, for us as people of God, men and women of God of many races, that we're judged by the content of our character. Melissa shared how her friend has to train her son on how to be arrested. And we've had that same conversation. It's very real with our son. Like, do not resist, because that is the culture and climate that we still live in. Not nearly as bad as it was before. However, it's still present in some of the people who have not felt the love of Jesus or understood him and his cause. I think if I were to share anything as far as what to do practically now, I was a woman of many protests, in my day. I think that this, the scriptures that Luke shared in the very beginning of the wisdom and the self-control, the message of a whisper is loud and clear. And a protest, walking peaceably, that message, I watched a beautiful video of people protesting, marching throughout our country. I just felt so moved. Of course, the looting is illegal, and I think that's for the people who understand. I understand the anger and the rage without a doubt, but I also know that sadly, the message then becomes lost because they just see the violence or the destruction of property. And I understand the rage, but I do think that there's such power in collectively coming together as men and women, holding up the banner of Jesus. Amongst our family here in the kingdom, Titus 1:15, to the pure, all things are pure. And I think to understand that when we come into the kingdom, I came into the kingdom with 28 years of my own life and my own way of thinking. And really, it does take time to undo a lot of the things the way that I thought. It does take time, but my heart was willing. And I know that when each of us make Jesus Lord of our life, to the women, when we've made that commitment, we said, okay, we're changing our way to the way of Jesus. And so I think there's got to be a love and a understanding, a trust that each disciple that said Jesus is Lord really does mean that. And we're going to have to be patient with each other and understand that, hey, we have to get through this together. Luke and I know that he loves me. I know that he loves the kingdom. I know that he loves all people. We ourselves have had conversation about what's hurtful. And I know that his heart is not to be hurtful, but to understand. And I think that if we have that purity of heart that Jesus truly did have, we can overcome in the kingdom and truly be a beacon of light that can outshine this dark world if we work together arm in arm and looking at each other, knowing that in 1 Corinthians 13:8, love never fails, but it also always trusts. So I think that as disciples of Jesus, we absolutely have to have in mind the way of Jesus. And like it or not, it's not my message, it's the message of the Bible. And if you have made Jesus your Lord and your standard, then that's what you agree to at your baptism. So understand that Jesus' way is right, God's way is right, and our way is not. And what power we can have if we have a unified front to fight for each other, for righteousness and purity of heart in his kingdom. I love you. Thank you so much for letting me share.